Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Securing Technology in Education, Overcoming Resource Challenges. Thanks for joining us. As everyone is still getting signed in, we'll just go over a few housekeeping items. Please think of questions throughout the webinar and direct them to the Q&A section. We'll be answering them throughout and at the end of the webinar. And this webinar will be recorded. We will share the recording with you shortly after the webinar is finished. If we don't get to all of your questions, we will follow up with you afterwards. But reaching out to info@jamf.com will also get you in contact with someone at Jamf quickly. My name's Matt Pullen, and I work in the product marketing team here at Jamf, focusing on education. With over 20 years of classroom experience, as well as working as a professional learning specialist with Apple, I've supported many schools in their deployments and integration of technology, often exploring ways beyond the classroom to maximize efficiency of the devices to essentially scale up deployments within an institution's financial capacity. And that's what we wanted to talk about today. And we have a lot to cover. For those new to Jamf, we will kick off with a quick overview of Jamf and how we have a long history of supporting education institutions to succeed with Apple. We will then take a look at some of the possibilities when it comes to funding a deployment before jumping into a discussion around why this is important for today's learners. We will then share some stories of success in this area before wrapping things up with some guidance on where you can find out more to help you with your own journeys. At Jamf, our mission is to empower student success, and we bridge that gap between what Apple creates and what education requires. And we do this by creating enterprise secure solutions for any kind of institution that are education simple and protect the privacy of your students and staff. And we've been helping organizations succeed with Apple for more than 20 years. Today, Jamf helps more than 72,000 customers that manage and secure more than 30 million Apple devices. And we've seen Apple adoption take off over the last few years, and we've seen education transformed by Apple. And we're the only company in the world that provides complete management and security for an Apple-first environment. Our ability to manage, secure, and extend the Apple experience with deep integrations with Microsoft, Google, and other education solutions to deliver a complete experience in education, opening up new learning and teaching opportunities. And one other major benefit of choosing Jamf is our exclusive focus on Apple and our history of and commitment to something we call same-day support. Now, same-day support means less work for you, faster access to new Apple features for your end users, and better control for your admins. For 11 years running, Jamf has delivered support for new Apple operating systems, macOS, iPadOS, iOS, and tvOS, the day they are released. If your educators or students, users are craving that hot new feature from Apple, it's easy to kick off a mass operating system upgrade across your entire Apple fleet. Let's jump into today's topics, and let's start with funding options and approaches. The pandemic saw a huge increase in government funding across the globe, with technology being the key solution to connect students with their teachers and maintain some form of education when school buildings were closed. Educators quickly had to adapt new approaches, and schools had to look at their technology available to enable student access. And where schools had a more developed program, this transition was easier. But in schools that hadn't begun to build these digital strategies, the transition was more complex. Government support meant that schools were provided more devices that could be used at home, connecting students with their teachers. But in many cases, this was not a permanent solution. And in fact, many of those initial devices are getting close to the point of needing a refresh. IT typically looks at 3 to 5 year cycles for this, due to updates to technology and the need to maintain device security. So how does this impact on a school's refresh plan, especially as we see the increased need for digital literacy, as we will discuss later? Planning for a continual refresh is essential. If a curriculum or school approach to learning and teaching with technology as part of its overall strategy, then what does the deployment look like in the future as the devices get outdated? Will the education of students that start today be different to those that start in 3 to 5 years' time? will their devices still be able to offer the same access required? To put it another way, would you use the same pens in 3 years' time, or would you have a plan to replace them? It may be more expensive to replace technology, but the point is the same. So making sure that there is a plan in place for that next spend is critical for the success of any initial vision. Where government funding may have been used, what was that level of funding? How might you match that over time? Now, some of this can be achieved by trading in those devices to recover some of that residual value, meaning that those devices can start to have an impact on the cost of its replacement. It's important to note here that this is where the total cost of purchase discussion is important to have when considering device purchases. Where some devices may be cheaper in that initial purchase, they also hold less residual value, whereas higher value initial purchase also comes with that high residual value, making the overall cost actually less. This is the case in iPad and Chromebooks, and a useful factor when considering which tools to purchase in the first place. It's also important to understand and explore the funding streams available to you in your region. Is there a digital fund? Can digital tools be purchased under different funding streams where those tools meet the outcomes of the funding? For example, access for less privileged, attainment improvement funding for specific subjects, where you can justify the tool is used to impact on the outcome. Funding can help you pay for that device. Then there's parental funding as an option. Not applicable in all cases, but depending on the approach you take, device funding from parents may be an option. This usually works by parents paying a monthly fee that covers the cost of the device. It's then owned by the parents, but utilised as an educational tool. Once the payments are all met, ownership fully transfers to the parent, but in most cases it still remains managed by the school for educational purposes, or can be refreshed in the same way as previously discussed. There are many benefits and drawbacks to this approach that need considering. It's a great way to engage parents in the school and showcase what the technology is doing to support learning and extend that learning opportunity at home. And it can also support a social aspect by providing devices that may not be affordable to many at a reduced monthly payment option. And schools can often utilise funding pots to reduce payments for families that can't afford that full price. Some drawbacks, though, exist around maintaining that monthly fee, parents getting credit to join the scheme, and students moving schools midway through a scheme. All things to consider if looking at this as an option. And one other thing to look at in more detail to help school with budgets is the wider impact of having technology in the classroom. This can be as simple as looking at those operational efficiencies that can impact on spending in other areas, such as printing and photocopying. In many cases, use of technology can reduce this significantly, and with a really robust approach to a digital strategy can in fact start to pay for the devices themselves. Incorporating the use of inline feedback, marking, communication, digital storage of work, etc. all means less need to print, photocopy, or even have exercise books for all of that student work. That also means less of a need for pens and other equipment. Now, that might not be what every school wants to do, but looking at where you can save money will go a long way to keeping a digital strategy thriving. And then there is a consolidation of your vendors. At Jamf, we offer both management and security, providing cost savings as we bundle together those offerings to support your deployment. Offering these solutions together can both simplify and support the integration and cost saving of your deployment. Whether you're using iPad only or a mix with Mac and iPad, we focus on an Apple first, Apple best strategy, and we ensure that you're covered in both of these areas with a clear focus on making those Apple devices work in the way you expect them to, as well as how your end users will expect them to work based on their knowledge of Apple in the consumer space. These are essential elements to consider when choosing the systems that will support your deployment. So let's build on that and look at why an approach which transforms how the school operates not only saves money to pay for ongoing development, but also meets the needs of education and industry. Learning isn't straightforward. We can't just follow a single script or even create a few scripts that meet general needs. Learners are unique, and so is how they learn. And this can bring huge challenges to classrooms, but one that we think should be met. if we want all learners to succeed. And during the pandemic, we saw that learners, when given alternative approaches to access learning, actually did well as a result. Though this does not mean that everything was perfect, it shows us that in different circumstances, many learners will achieve better, given a different environment. And as we've returned to the classroom, how have we actually embraced this? Are we utilising those devices in a way that is benefiting those students from the things that we've learnt through the pandemic? Have we recognised that some learners have accepted a style of learning in a traditional classroom that they now know isn't actually the right one for them? These challenges are transformational, both for educators and the learners, and it shows that there does need to be alternative approaches to make sure we meet the needs of all and not just the few. Those generalised approaches that meet the masses often miss those most in need. These are the top skills required for the modern workplace, as identified by the Future of Jobs report from the World Economic Forum. Whilst we can never know what the jobs of the future will actually look like, we can definitely try to develop learners that can have a diverse skill set that may be more in line with what is required, based on the emergence of technologies that are driving this. What is it that employers are actually looking for today? That traditional notion of training for a particular job just won't meet the needs of today's, and even more importantly, tomorrow's learners. We can see that there is an increased importance in skills that require thinking skills, innovation, and initiative. Students need to understand that wealth of knowledge and content available, but also what to do with it all. Why is it important, and what is not important? And even though we can Google the answer to almost anything, what do we do with that content that can actually make a difference? And then we look at the skills that are in decline. We see that with the emergence of new technologies, the role of the person is even more important. No longer do we need people to carry out simple tasks or have a bank of knowledge. Like it or not, technology will do that even more efficiently and doesn't need to go to sleep. But the human element is essential in the ways that humans are different to computers. Humans won't be able to compete at algorithmic jobs, things that follow a script, but absolutely can in heuristic roles, those requiring creativity, thinking and empathy. And those need a different type of motivation to succeed, and a need to develop that human element and skill should be part of a learner's education. So how do we meet these challenges? We acknowledge the fact that it takes many elements to empower that student success. Our innovations and partnerships strive to serve this vibrant technology community and goes hand in hand with IT to serve educators, parents and carers, and others that make up this education ecosystem. When we all work together, we know that that solution can be found. And it's not just a single solution, but adaptable solutions that take into account the changing world we live in. Flexibility and adaptability are key. So when we look at this embracing of technology, what other areas of the world can it have an impact on, which can ultimately further that cost saving as you deploy these devices? Let's take the classroom as an example. Knowing what we know about the pandemic for nearly 2 years, students learnt in a very different way to what a traditional notion of school looks like. And in many places around the world, this was actually more like their normal anyway, with homeschooling already being a thing for many. Plus the idea of remote areas having limited access to actual buildings and students that act as carers at home, so they can't always get into the classroom. These extremes of learning approaches are now better known as an alternative. So how can we use this how can we adapt this more traditional approach to adapt to these new needs? Learning spaces no longer need to be restricted to a space where teachers need to control input and content from a single location. The pandemic showed many that technology unleashes the ability for students to manage their own learning through various methods, be that finding information from others, the internet, or unique learning situations, developing thinking independently, or through discussion, or through creating new responses to old questions. The things that makes this a reality is having spaces where learning can happen, where teachers can personalise access and support regardless of location in that new space. And how does this impact on your cost savings when it comes to the use of your buildings alone? How do you utilize that space in new ways which actually can support in the ways that you save money through space utilization? The technology can empower those teachers to use space in new ways. So what does this look like in practice? Well, here are some examples of institutions that have utilized Jamf solutions and impacted on their overall spend, as well as just IT efficiency. The City of Beckham utilizes both Jamf School and Jamf Safe Internet as part of their deployment. Having a single vendor not only supports in terms of seamless IT management and security of devices, but also takes advantage of time saving for IT admins as they get their work done, as the tools being used work together, and that's what they're built to do. IT admins spend less time moving between solutions to get their tasks done. And when you update something in your management area, it transfers that information across to the other area, meaning student devices are exactly where you need them to be for students to learn. And in the UK, the Shaw Education Trust has developed savings utilising Jamf in their deployment, but also benefited from those operational efficiencies as well. Here we see the impact of considering the approaches to the use of technology beyond access to content, printing and photocopying, having a huge impact, as well as the devices being used at home, which not only saves electricity spend for the school, but linked to learning extends those opportunities for learners to learn wherever they need to when it works best for them. These operational efficiencies can be huge, but are all part of that wider vision for what your deployment can actually do within your institution. Now let's just finally explore some of the additional ways you can develop your plans around the role of technology further, creating that clear plan for their effective use, not just in the classroom, but beyond it. Funding options vary from country to country, and though government funding for technology from the pandemic may be coming to an end, or indeed ended in many places, there is still support available in this area that can help. For example, in the UK alone, there are opportunities to apply for funding through the Education Environment Fund, basing that project on research-based outcomes that technology can provide. Now, this approach is key to finding funding opportunities, but also helps the focus go way beyond the devices themselves to a real purposeful deployment. Apple authorized education specialists can also support in any refresh or new deployment by supporting the discussion, as we mentioned earlier, around device residual value. This can help make those longer term plans around budgetary spend, when the value of device is taken into account at the initial purchase point. And then as we looked at centralized funding, it's important to explore those efficiency savings as you look to stretch that budget you already have. Where might a change in approach and the use of technology help you find savings that ultimately help fund a technology deployment? From printing, photocopying, or the purchase of exercise books, there may be lots of money available if you just think differently about how you spend it. And finally, supporting the idea of why deployments in technology are very important for today's learners. The OECD provides reports that can support that purposeful use of technology and why it's really important for students to have this digital literacy in their education. So let's just recap on what we've looked at today. There are alternative funding options for education. We've benefited from governments seeing the need through a pandemic, but we have to build on that as we go forward. And there are options available, be that in your own efficiencies, bringing your parents into the mix, or just thinking about different ways to spend the money that you already have. And then we've also had a look at that effective use of those technology resources that we have, thinking about how we can stretch them further than that classroom utilization, but think about those wider efficiencies which can effectively not only develop the student as a learner in new ways, but also save you time and money in the process. We've explored a few of those education success stories, and we encourage you to have a look on jamf.com at some additional success stories from around the world in different ways that schools, higher ed colleges have utilised technology to empower their students. And finally, some guidance that can help support your ongoing refresh or deployment. Now, this is just the start of a journey. This webinar is here to spark a thought process, give teachers, leaders and IT insight into the possibilities of your Apple devices. And we wanted to share with you some additional resources that Jamf has that can support you in this area. Our ebook on educational technology management for beginners is a great place to start if you haven't already thought about how you can get the most out of your technology, not just for IT admins, but developing this into the classroom. And if you're interested in why this should be such an important part of education technology going forward for learners, our book on bringing universal design for learning to an innovative classroom can help you discover how this can actually transform what classrooms can look like, supporting all types of learners. And then we have our additional solutions, Jamf Nation and Jamf Marketplace. With Jamf Nation, we have our proven Jamf Nation community, an online forum which is home to over 100,000 Apple IT-focused individuals that learn from each other, discuss best practices, and have access to a wealth of resources and third-party tools. And then we have our marketplace, with tools and resources that can help make our Jamf platform even more useful to our customers, with integrations such as Shobi, Salamander Soft, Explain Everything, and many more. All providing these integrations between these solutions and Jamf to make your work both simple and secure that can help build out your education solution and potentially further support your cost savings. That's it for today's session. I hope you found this insightful and have learnt a lot more. But remember, this is only the start, so please do reach out to us for any additional information.